Revenge ain't always about blood. Trust me. That's a fate that's worse than death.
Now, over the past few weeks, we've been breaking down each and every single character arc. We've been through all the major players one by one, in terms of how they've got to where they are, their relationships, the position they find themselves in based on the new trailer, and what we could expect going forward in part 2. All the character breakdowns are in my Go Season 4 playlist if you have missed any, along with my part 2 death predictions. But now that we're getting closer to episode 6, expect a host of new teasers, images, or exclusives to drop, which is the topic of today's breakdown. This was one of the latest teasers that was released a few days ago on social media, which I did play for you guys in my last breakdown. However, I wanted to focus on one specific detail in particular, where Tariq said the following: "Revenge isn't always about blood, trust me, that's a fate that's worse than death." So, we're going to run through what Tariq means and whether it gives us a few foreshadows and clues in regards to what his next chess move could actually be in all things Power Book 2 Ghost Season 4 Part 2.
You can't kill me. Nothing can. Not when you're at the top of the game.
Now, in the Street and Drug game, what we've learned from Power, and also what we know from real life, there are always a few ways it can end. The obvious two endgames and fates that we hear quite often is that you either end up dead or in jail.
I'm doing this for us. It's our escape plan.
Escape from what?
I don't know any old wrinkled drug dealers. They're either dead or inside, Tasha. That doesn't scare you?
I had Ramirez look into Tariq. Anybody who's around that boy for too long ends up either dead or locked up.
So it is quite common knowledge for all those who are in the game in Power. They know what the end game is, or at least know of someone who's either in jail or now dead. That's one of the reasons why Ghost wanted out from Season 1. He knew the risks. He weighed up the pros and cons, what he's done to get to the position he found himself in by having to kill Breeze, committing countless other murders, and betraying a certain someone by sending them to prison, someone who Ghost loved like a brother. So, with the underlying theme of Season 4 being revenge, Tariq being father like son, and how he mentions in the teaser that's a fate worse than death, which you can assume is in conversation with Brayden. I do think he's probably talking to Brayden when he's plotting his next move, explaining how they can still get revenge without spilling any blood. But I do wonder if he's thinking about a very similar move to what Ghost made with Kanan.
You're framing Kanan like you and Ghost did when I was a little kid.
Sometimes sending someone to prison is actually a fate worse than death. There are countless of other ways you can get revenge, which I will touch on in just a moment, but sending someone to prison, for some, that can actually be torture, especially for characters such as Monet and Claudia from Force, two characters who are driven by power and control. We all know in prison you have no control and you have no freedom. You're governed by other rules in terms of what time you wake up, have breakfast, lunch and dinner, to when you go to sleep and when you get yard time. You're confined in this very small room either by yourself or with someone else. So, all you have time is to think about every bad choice you've made, maybe every murder you've committed, every sin you've committed, every lie you've told, and so on, knowing that you may never be free ever again. It can make a person go really crazy, knowing that they could potentially spend the rest of their life in jail.
You're away from everything that comforts you, everything that makes you feel at home. You have no idea what's gonna happen to you. You have no control of what you're doing, when you're moving, how you're eating. For the first time in your life, you realize the choices aren't yours. Fuck a gun or a knife being pointed at you. That shit, that first night in jail, that's real fear.
So, just on a quick side note, I really am intrigued to see how Drew actually deals with being locked up in a cell. Does he lose his mind? And does he kinda wish he'd rather be dead instead? Especially considering he's pretty much lost everything that he wanted to live for anyway. So, it's gonna be interesting to see how Drew kind of deals with this from his perspective and also from his mindset. But, being in jail, it can be a fate worse than death for some, because as Kanan once told Tariq back in Power, there was no way he was going back inside. We knew he'd rather die than go back to prison. So just referring back to what Tariq said in the teaser, that's a fate worse than death. Whatever he's thinking in terms of revenge about a certain character, it may be Noma, Kane, Effie, Monet, or someone else. At this moment in time, we can't be 100% sure. It can even be Detective Carter because we also know how much of a threat he is. But whatever he is thinking, he's not thinking about death, because revenge isn't always about spilling blood. Maybe he's thinking about framing someone like Ghost and Tasha did with Kanan when they were younger. Or, just like Kane tried to do with him when he put Ramirez's badge in his drawer in Season 2. I mean, they've been teasing Tariq being father like son in a lot of these promos for Season 4, and it would be very Ghost-like for Tariq to pull off something very similar. Let's remember, Ghost also did it in the real world by framing the boys across the street when they used dirty tactics to gain Karen Bassett's business. Again, proving that revenge isn't always about spilling blood, there are other ways. If you can kind of just sit back, tell yourself sometimes the best response is no response, let your enemies wait in fear, attack when they're least expecting it, at least that's what Ghost did, and I do think that's what Tariq needs to do in part 2. So, let's see what moves Tariq has up his sleeve and what cards he plays in terms of getting revenge and who he's specifically speaking of. We all know he has eyes set on Anya Covington, so let's see if that could actually be one way, destroying her relationship with her daughter, taking everything she has and everything she's built, basically doing something very similar to what Ghost did with Kanan. But again, let's not forget there is a Carter problem. There's also Zion, or even one of the Tejadas, because we all know Kane and Tariq have never seen eye to eye. So let's see who's in Tariq's crosshairs when he's talking about a fate worse than death. Now the final point I think worth raising is, there are a few other fates worse than death besides prison, and we have seen some in shows like Snowfall and BMF, as well as power through characters like Sam in Raising Kanan, and also Lacey's back in Power. So, just a small spoiler warning if you're not caught up with any of those shows. But the fate that I'm referring to is addiction, where someone is basically trapped in a cycle of dependence and suffering either in the form of drugs or alcohol. With Sam the crackhead, we learned how he had a really great life before he got hooked on crack, but just have a look at how he turned out in Raising Kanan. In BMF, we saw me send Lamar into a very similar path worse than death. We also saw what happened to Franklin Saint towards the end of Snowfall, where he turned to alcohol and where he actually ended up, ironically, just like his father. Because when we were first introduced to Alton's character, he was also an addict on the streets. But addiction, betrayal, losing loved ones and family members, that can also be equally as devastating and a fate far worse than death for some people. Of course, there are a lot of variables to consider. For example, some would definitely rather go to jail than end up dead, or vice versa. Some would also rather go to jail than lose a loved one. I mean, it's all character dependent, but the bottom line is, there are other fates, and there are other ways Tariq will be looking to get revenge rather than spilling blood. And to be honest, I do think he has to look at alternative ways, because I did mention early in Season 4, Tariq is spilling way too much blood, especially after killing Salim. I said he's killing way too many people, and if he kind of continues on this path of destruction, he will get caught. So, it does seem like he is now thinking of other ways, but let's see what they are. Let's see if these other fates which he says are worse than death are similar to what Ghost has done in the past, or what we've seen before from other shows. So, that's just some food for thought and a short little breakdown I thought was worth discussing and also keeping an eye on in part 2, based on Tariq's words in this particular teaser. What is Tariq's next move, and how does he plan on getting some revenge that doesn't necessarily have to be about blood? That's a fate worse than death. Drop all your thoughts and predictions down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.